What would you do if the person you humiliated in public turned out to be the most powerful man in the entire building? Before we start, comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because this story starts with disrespect, but it ends with complete shock. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning at one of the biggest corporate buildings in the city. Employees rushing inside, security checking badges, executives walking through the lobby like they owned the world. Everything looked normal, controlled, professional. But in less than 20 minutes, one decision made in that lobby would destroy reputations, expose people, and leave an entire company in silence. Because the man they laughed at wasn't who they thought he was. The city was already alive long before the sun fully rose above the skyline. Endless streams of traffic moved through downtown streets, headlights reflecting against glass buildings that towered over everything below. People hurried along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups, briefcases, laptops, phones pressed to their ears. Every movement fast, calculated, routine. In the center of it all stood one of the most powerful corporate buildings in the city, a massive tower of steel and glass stretching high into the morning sky, its surface reflecting sunlight like polished metal. The company logo rotated slowly above the entrance on a giant digital display, glowing against the modern architecture like a symbol of wealth and authority. Everything about the building was designed to impress people before they even stepped inside. And inside, it was even more intimidating. The lobby looked less like an office and more like a luxury hotel built for billionaires. Smooth marble floors reflected every movement like mirrors. Massive chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft golden light across the room. Large digital screens displayed stock prices, company achievements, interviews with executives, photos of successful partnerships worth millions. Employees moved quickly through the space dressed in expensive tailored suits, polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble as conversations about meetings, investments, contracts, and deadlines blended together into the low hum of corporate life. Nobody moved slowly there. Nobody looked uncertain. Everything in the building carried the same energy: success, money, power. Near the main entrance stood two security guards beside the turnstiles. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed, radios clipped neatly to their shoulders, expressions serious and practiced from years of controlling who entered the building and who didn't. They watched people carefully, though most employees barely acknowledged them anymore. Workers simply flashed badges against the scanners and walked through without stopping, already focused on their next meeting before the elevator doors even opened. The guards judged people quickly. They had learned to. In a building filled with executives and investors, appearances mattered. Expensive watches mattered. Tailored suits mattered. Confidence mattered. And most importantly, belonging mattered. Then the front doors opened again. A man stepped inside quietly, almost unnoticed at first. He was black, somewhere in his early 40s, carrying a worn leather bag over one shoulder. His clothes were simple compared to everyone else in the lobby. Dark jacket, plain shirt, no designer logos, no expensive accessories, no polished image carefully built for status. But despite that, there was something calm about him, something controlled. He didn't rush like everyone else. He simply paused near the entrance for a moment, taking in the lobby with steady eyes, observing everything around him carefully. Employees passing by glanced at him briefly before looking away again. To most of them, he looked completely out of place. Not because he was loud, not because he caused attention, but because in a building like that, people were expected to look successful before anyone treated them like they mattered. And he didn't match the image people in that lobby trusted. One young employee walking toward the elevators slowed slightly as he passed, giving the man another quick look before continuing on. Two women near the reception desk exchanged a glance without saying anything. A man carrying coffee lowered his eyes briefly toward the leather bag, then toward the man's shoes, before continuing toward the turnstiles. Small reactions, tiny judgments, but they were happening everywhere around him. The black man remained calm, completely unaware, or perhaps completely unconcerned, about the attention building quietly around him. He adjusted the strap of the worn bag slightly on his shoulder and began walking toward the security checkpoint with measured, relaxed steps. No nervousness, no hesitation, just calm confidence. The kind of confidence people often fail to recognize when it doesn't come wrapped in expensive clothing. One of the guards noticed him immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly as he followed the man's approach. Something about him didn't fit the pattern the guard expected from people entering the building. No badge visible, no rushed corporate energy, no expensive appearance. The second guard followed the first guard's gaze and straightened slightly beside the scanner. Around them, the flow of employees continued normally, but the atmosphere near the entrance had already started to shift, quietly, subtly, like the beginning of something nobody there yet understood. The black man reached the turnstiles and calmly reached into his pocket as if searching for something. One of the guards immediately stepped forward. "Sir," he said firmly. The man looked up calmly. "Yes?" "Employee badge." The lobby noise seemed quieter for a second. The man continued checking his pockets calmly, then looked back up. "I don't have it yet," he said. And just like that, the entire morning began to change. The moment the man said he didn't have a badge, something shifted in the guards immediately. It was subtle at first, a small tightening in posture, a sharper look in the eyes. But in a building like that, small changes mattered. The first guard straightened fully beside the scanner, crossing slightly into the man's path so he couldn't continue toward the elevators. Around them, employees continued moving through the lobby, but more people were beginning to notice the interaction now. Not openly, not obviously. Just enough slowed steps and sideways glances to feel the attention quietly building. The black man remained calm, one hand still near his jacket pocket, his leather bag resting against his shoulder. "I'm expected upstairs," he explained in an even tone. The first guard nodded once, but there was no understanding in the gesture. Only procedure. Without identification, you cannot access the building. The man didn't argue. "I understand," he said calmly, "but there should be a meeting scheduled under my name." The second guard stepped closer now, clearly more suspicious than the first. "Name?" he asked shortly. "Carter," the man replied. The guard looked at him for a second longer than necessary, then reached toward the desk computer beside the security checkpoint. He typed briefly while the first guard remained standing directly in front of the man, arms loosely crossed, body language already defensive. Nearby employees passing through the turnstiles were listening now, even if they pretended not to. One man slowed while pretending to answer an email on his phone. Two younger employees near the reception desk whispered quietly to each other while glancing toward the scene. In a corporate building like that, unusual moments spread attention quickly, especially when someone looked like they didn't belong. The second guard frowned slightly at the monitor. "I don't see anything under that name." The man nodded slowly, not reacting emotionally. "Check with the executive floor," he said. "I'm supposed to meet the board this morning." That sentence immediately changed the atmosphere again. The first guard let out a short breath through his nose, almost a laugh. The second guard looked up from the computer with visible disbelief. "The board?" he repeated. The man met his eyes calmly. "Yes." The second guard leaned back slightly, exchanging a quick look with his partner. That look said everything. Neither of them believed him. "Sir," the first guard said now, his tone becoming colder, "people can't just walk in here claiming they have meetings with executives." The man stayed relaxed. "I'm not claiming anything." "Really?" the second guard said. "Because right now that's exactly what this looks like." A few employees nearby smirked quietly before turning away toward the elevators. The man noticed the reactions around him, but his expression never changed. That calmness irritated the guards even more. They were used to nervous people explaining themselves, defending themselves, trying too hard. But this man didn't do any of that. He simply stood there with quiet certainty, and something about that confidence without visible status made them uncomfortable. "Look," the first guard continued, lowering his voice slightly but keeping it firm, "if you don't have a badge, appointment, confirmation, or identification, then you cannot stay in the lobby." The man adjusted the strap of his leather bag again. "I have identification." The second guard immediately extended his hand. "Then let's see it." The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a wallet. Not rushed, not defensive, calm. He opened it carefully and handed over a driver's license. The first guard looked at it briefly, then at the man again. This doesn't prove you belong here. The sentence hung in the air longer than it should have, because everyone knew what he really meant. The man took the license back slowly. I never said I worked here, he replied calmly. I said I'm expected here. That answer only made the second guard more irritated. Expected by who exactly? He demanded. The man paused for a second, then answered simply, the board of directors. The second guard laughed openly this time, loud enough for people nearby to hear clearly. Right, he said sarcastically, and I'm the owner of the building. A few nearby employees chuckled quietly before quickly hiding it. The first guard stepped closer now, his voice firmer than before. Sir, I'm asking you politely. Leave the property before this becomes an issue. The black man looked around the lobby for a brief moment. His eyes moved across the marble floors, the elevators, the giant company logo hanging above the reception area, then back to the guards. Interesting, he said quietly. The first guard frowned. What's interesting? The man looked directly at him. The way people decide who belongs somewhere. The sentence caught the guard off guard for half a second, but only half a second. Then irritation returned stronger. This isn't about that, he said quickly. This is about security protocol. The man gave a small nod. Of course. But something about the way he said it made the second guard angrier. Like he knew something they didn't. Like he wasn't intimidated at all. The tension near the entrance was becoming impossible to ignore now. Employees entering the lobby slowed openly to watch. Receptionists glanced up repeatedly from their desks. Even people stepping out of elevators were noticing the scene. And standing in the center of it all, surrounded by polished marble and corporate power, was a man everyone had already judged before asking a single real question. The tension near the entrance had grown thick enough that people across the lobby could feel it now. Employees who should have already been upstairs slowed their pace near the elevators. Conversations lowered into whispers. Receptionists behind the front desk glanced up repeatedly while pretending to continue their work. The polished corporate calm of the building had cracked, and all attention was quietly pulling toward one scene near the turnstiles. Right toward the black man standing calmly between the two security guards. The first guard crossed his arms fully now, his expression harder than before. Whatever professionalism had existed at the start of the interaction was beginning to disappear. In its place came irritation, assumption, judgment. Sir, he said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear clearly, you need to stop wasting everyone's time. The black man remained composed. I'm not trying to waste anyone's time. Really? The second guard replied with a sarcastic smile. Because right now you're standing in the lobby of a billion-dollar company claiming you have a meeting with the board while dressed like you walked in off the street. Several nearby employees looked away quickly after hearing that, but not before reacting. A smirk here, a quiet laugh there, small reactions, but enough. The man noticed them. Of course he did, but his expression never changed. He simply stood there calmly, his hand resting lightly on the strap of the worn leather bag over his shoulder. That calmness only seemed to irritate the guards more. The first guard stepped even closer now, invading the man's space slightly. Look around, he said, gesturing toward the lobby. Everybody here has credentials. Everybody here belongs here. His eyes moved slowly over the man's clothes again before returning to his face. And then there's you. The sentence hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Nearby, a young employee standing near the elevators lowered his eyes awkwardly. Another employee whispered something under her breath to a co-worker while still watching the scene. The lobby had become an audience, and everyone knew it. The black man finally spoke again, his voice still calm. You've already decided who I am. The second guard laughed quietly. No, he replied. You decided that yourself when you walked in here without identification. I showed you identification, the man corrected calmly. Not company identification, the guard snapped back immediately. And certainly nothing proving you belong on the executive floor. The word belong carried extra weight when he said it. The man noticed. The employees nearby noticed too. One receptionist shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, but nobody said anything. Nobody stepped in, because corporate spaces had their own kind of silence, the kind where people watched uncomfortable things happen and convinced themselves it wasn't their place to interfere. The first guard looked toward the front doors briefly, then back at the man. "This is your final warning," he said. "Leave now." The black man slowly looked around the lobby again. His eyes moved carefully across the giant company logo above the reception area, across the expensive marble floors, across the employees watching quietly from a distance, then back to the guards. "And if I don't?" he asked softly. The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't confrontational, but it changed something immediately. The second guard straightened fully. "Then we escort you out ourselves." A few nearby employees stopped walking completely now. One man pretending to check his phone wasn't even hiding the fact he was listening anymore. The atmosphere had crossed from awkward into openly uncomfortable. The black man nodded once, slowly. "Interesting," he said again. The first guard frowned immediately. "What's so interesting to you?" The man looked directly at him. "How quickly people confuse appearance with value." The second guard rolled his eyes dramatically. "Here we go." He looked towards several nearby employees and gave a small sarcastic smile, almost inviting them into the moment. "You hear this?" A few uncomfortable chuckles followed. The man carrying coffee near the elevator smirked briefly before looking away again. The black man remained still, his posture relaxed despite the growing humiliation happening around him. "You know what your problem is?" The second guard continued. "You walk in here acting calm like you belong around executives, but you don't understand how this world works." The man tilted his head slightly. "And how does it work?" The guard gestured around the lobby. "People earn their place here." The answer came quickly, too quickly, like something repeated many times before. The black man nodded slowly again. "I see." The first guard stepped forward suddenly, his patience clearly gone. "No," he said sharply. "I don't think you do." His voice had grown loud enough now that conversations across the lobby were stopping completely. "This company deals with billion-dollar clients, CEOs, investors, leaders." He looked the man up and down again. "Not random people wandering in off the street pretending they have meetings with the board." The words landed hard, publicly, intentionally. And now there was no pretending this interaction was about procedure anymore. It had become humiliation. Open humiliation. The black man finally went quiet for several seconds. Not defeated, not nervous, just quiet. His eyes lowered briefly toward the marble floor before lifting again calmly. "You've made your decision already," he said softly. "Absolutely," the second guard replied immediately. The man looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right." The guard seemed surprised by how easily he said it. The first guard gestured sharply toward the exit doors. "Then let's go." The black man adjusted his bag slightly and took one slow step toward the entrance. But before he could move further, the second guard reached out suddenly and grabbed his arm firmly, clearly wanting to establish control now that people were watching openly. The movement changed the energy instantly. Several employees visibly reacted. One receptionist looked shocked for a moment. Another employee near the elevators quietly lifted his phone slightly, like he was considering recording. The black man slowly lowered his eyes toward the hand gripping his arm, then looked back up calmly at the guard. "You really shouldn't do that," he said quietly. But instead of hearing the warning in his voice, the guards mistook it for weakness, and that mistake was about to change everything. The guard's hand tightened around the man's arm, the grip firm enough now that people across the lobby could clearly see what was happening. The polished corporate atmosphere that once felt controlled and professional had completely transformed into something tense, uncomfortable, almost theatrical. Employees were no longer pretending not to watch. Conversations had stopped entirely near the elevators. Receptionists stared openly from behind the desk. Even people entering through the front doors slowed down the moment they noticed security physically handling someone in the middle of the lobby. The black man didn't resist. That was the strange part. Most people in that situation would pull away, argue, raise their voice, defend themselves. But he didn't. He simply stood there calmly while the guard held his arm, his eyes moving slowly across the lobby, like he was observing every detail around him. The second guard stepped closer immediately, positioning himself on the other side as if expecting trouble. "Sir, you were asked to leave," he said sharply. "Now you're being escorted out." The man looked at him quietly. "Escorted?" he repeated calmly. "Yes," the first guard replied. unless you want the situation to become more difficult. The man's eyes lowered briefly toward the hand gripping his arm again, then back to the guard's face. You've already made it difficult, he said softly. The second guard rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Nearby employees exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, some entertained, some simply curious to see how far the situation would go. A young intern near the reception desk shifted awkwardly, clearly uneasy watching the scene unfold, but like everyone else in the lobby, he stayed silent, because nobody wanted to involve themselves. Nobody wanted to challenge security, and nobody wanted to risk being wrong about who belonged there. The first guard began guiding the man toward the front entrance now, applying more pressure to his arm. The movement caused the leather bag to slip slightly off the man's shoulder. He adjusted it calmly with his free hand while continuing to walk without resistance. The image only strengthened the assumptions already spreading through the lobby. To many people watching, it looked like security was removing someone who had tried to enter somewhere he didn't belong. And in environments built on status, people often accepted that explanation without questioning it. You know, the second guard said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear, most people leave the first time they're asked. A few quiet laughs came from somewhere near the elevators. The black man heard them. But again, his expression never changed. Most people, he replied calmly, aren't being judged before they speak. The first guard immediately shook his head. Nobody judged you. The man looked directly at him. Really? That single word carried enough weight to make the guard uncomfortable for a brief second. But only for a brief second. His pride had already taken over now. Too many people were watching. Too much attention had built around the situation. Backing down no longer felt possible. This isn't personal, the guard insisted firmly as they continued moving toward the entrance. This is policy. The black man gave a slight nod. That's what people usually say. The second guard smirked sarcastically. You think this is about race? The lobby became even quieter somehow after that question. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked around slowly instead, at the employees watching, at the expensive suits, at the security cameras mounted near the ceiling, at the giant company logo above the reception desk, then back at the guards. I think, he said carefully, that people often reveal exactly who they are when they believe someone has no power. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The second guard scoffed loudly, clearly irritated now. Power? He repeated. Sir, right now you're being thrown out of the building. The man looked at him calmly. Is that what you think is happening? The guard frowned. What does that even mean? But before the man could answer, the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby suddenly opened. Fast. Urgently. Several executives stepped out at once, moving quickly across the marble floor while talking among themselves in tense voices. Expensive suits, senior management, board members, people employees usually moved out of the way for automatically. The energy in the lobby shifted instantly again. Workers near the elevators straightened immediately. Receptionists sat up. Even the guards glanced toward the executives briefly. The black man noticed them too, and for the first time since entering the building, something changed in his expression. Not emotion. Recognition. One of the executives looked up while walking quickly across the lobby, then froze mid-step, completely. His eyes locked onto the scene near the entrance, onto the two guards physically escorting the black man toward the doors, onto the hand gripping his arm, onto the leather bag slipping off his shoulder. The executive's face lost color instantly. Oh my God, he whispered under his breath, then louder, much louder. Stop! The entire lobby froze. Completely. The sound echoed through the marble space so sharply that even people near the reception desk jumped slightly. The guards immediately stopped moving. Employees turned toward the executive in confusion. The black man remained calm, standing exactly where he was while the executive rushed forward across the lobby with panic spreading visibly across his face. And suddenly, the people watching no longer looked entertained. They looked nervous, because something had just changed, something big, and everyone could feel it. The executive moved across the lobby so quickly that several employees instinctively stepped out of his way before he even reached them. His expensive dress shoes struck sharply against the marble floor. each step carrying urgency that immediately changed the atmosphere around him. The panic on his face was impossible to miss. Not irritation, not annoyance. Panic. Real panic. The guards looked confused immediately, their grip on the black man loosening slightly without them even realizing it. Nobody in the building had ever seen a senior executive react like that before, especially not over someone security was escorting out. "What are you doing?" the executive shouted again as he approached. His voice echoed through the massive lobby, cutting through the silence like a blade. The first guard straightened immediately, trying to recover control of the situation. "Sir, this individual entered the building without identification and refused to leave." "Are you out of your mind?" the executive snapped before he could finish. The guard froze mid-sentence. The second guard slowly released the man's arm completely now, uncertainty beginning to replace confidence across his face. The black man calmly adjusted the strap of his leather bag back onto his shoulder, his movements slow and controlled, completely unaffected by the chaos suddenly unfolding around him. Employees nearby stared openly now, no longer whispering, no longer smirking. The energy in the lobby had completely changed. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. The executive finally reached them, slightly out of breath, his eyes moving immediately toward the black man. "Sir," he said quickly, his tone changing instantly. Respectful now. Nervous. Careful. "I am so sorry." The guards looked at each other in confusion. One receptionist near the front desk slowly lowered her phone, realizing this was no longer entertainment. The executive turned sharply back toward security. "Do either of you have any idea who this man is?" Silence. The guards didn't answer immediately, because the question itself already sounded dangerous. The first guard swallowed slightly. "No, sir," he admitted carefully. "He claimed he had a meeting with the board, but—" "Claimed?" the executive interrupted sharply. "Claimed?" His voice rose again, drawing even more attention from across the lobby. More elevator doors opened in the distance as additional executives stepped out, immediately noticing the tension near the entrance. Several board members followed behind them, their conversations stopping the moment they saw the scene. The black man remained still, watching quietly while the entire building seemed to shift around him. "Sir," the second guard said cautiously, trying to defend himself now, "we were following protocol." The executive stared at him in disbelief. "Protocol?" he repeated. "You put your hands on him." The second guard's face tightened immediately. The first guard looked genuinely nervous now, glancing between the executive and the black man, like his mind was struggling to connect what he was seeing. "We didn't know," he started. "Exactly," the black man said calmly for the first time since the executive arrived. The entire lobby went silent again immediately. His voice wasn't loud, but the control in it was undeniable. Everyone turned toward him. He slowly looked around the lobby, taking in the faces watching from every direction. Employees, receptionists, interns, executives, security. Every person who had judged him before asking a real question. "You didn't know," he repeated calmly. "But you still decided." The words landed hard, much harder than shouting would have, because nobody could argue with them. The executive lowered his eyes briefly, visibly embarrassed. The guards stood completely still now, their earlier confidence gone entirely. Around them, employees who had laughed earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact, pretending suddenly to be focused elsewhere. But there was nowhere else to look. The moment had consumed the entire lobby. One of the board members finally stepped forward slowly from behind the executive team, his face pale. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully. The name moved through the lobby almost like a physical reaction. Several employees looked at each other immediately, recognition beginning to spread. The guards looked completely lost now. The first guard blinked. "Mr. Carter?" The executive turned toward the entire lobby slowly, his jaw tight with frustration and embarrassment. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "This man," he said firmly, gesturing toward the black man beside him, "is your new CEO." Silence. Total silence. It hit the room like an explosion without sound. One employee near the elevators actually took a step backward instinctively. A receptionist covered her mouth. The second guard's face lost all color immediately. For a second, nobody moved at all, because the human brain sometimes needs time to process a complete reversal of reality. Just minutes ago, security had treated him like he didn't belong in the building. Employees laughed quietly while he was publicly humiliated near the entrance. And now, everyone in the lobby suddenly realized they were standing in front of the most powerful person in the company. The black man, Mr. Carter, remained calm through all of it. No anger, no dramatic reaction, no shouting, which somehow made the silence even more unbearable. The first guard slowly removed his hand completely from where it had been near Mr. Carter's arm. Like he suddenly realized touching him at all had become unthinkable. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out, because there was nothing to say. The executive looked visibly sick with embarrassment. "Sir," he said quietly to Mr. Carter, "this is completely unacceptable." Mr. Carter looked at him calmly, then slowly around the lobby one more time. "Interesting first impression," he said softly, and somehow that quiet sentence made the entire building feel even smaller. The lobby fell completely silent. Employees froze near the elevators. Receptionists stopped typing, and even people entering through the front doors slowed down when they noticed the tension in the room. In the center of it all stood Mr. Carter, calm and composed, the same man security had just tried to throw out of the building minutes earlier. But now everything looked different. Not because he changed, because everyone finally understood who he was. The first guard's face turned pale almost instantly. His confident posture disappeared, replaced by visible panic. The second guard stepped back slightly, unable to hide the shock on his face. Around them, whispers spread quickly through the lobby. "That's the new CEO? Security grabbed him? Oh my God." Employees who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact completely. Mr. Carter calmly adjusted the strap of his leather bag while the silence around him grew heavier. The executive standing beside him looked deeply embarrassed. "Sir," he said carefully, "this does not represent our company." Mr. Carter looked at him quietly. "Doesn't it?" The question hit hard, because everyone in the lobby knew why this happened. It wasn't just policy, it was judgment, assumption, the belief that someone dressed simply couldn't possibly belong in a position of power. The first guard finally spoke, his voice noticeably weaker now. "Sir, we didn't know who you were." Mr. Carter looked directly at him. "Exactly," he said calmly. "You didn't know, but you decided anyway." The words landed across the lobby like a weight. Nobody had an answer. Mr. Carter slowly looked around the building one more time, his eyes moving across the expensive marble floors, the employees, the giant company logo above reception, then back to the guards. "You weren't protecting the building," he said quietly. "You were protecting an image." And suddenly the entire lobby understood. They hadn't just embarrassed a man. They had exposed the truth about the company itself. Nobody in the lobby seemed to know where to look anymore. Just minutes earlier, employees had watched the situation like entertainment, whispering quietly, smirking, judging from a distance. Now those same people stood frozen, avoiding eye contact completely. The atmosphere had changed from curiosity to embarrassment. The first guard remained near the entrance, his face tense, his earlier confidence completely gone. He looked like he was replaying every second of the interaction in his head, realizing how badly everything had gone wrong. The second guard lowered his eyes toward the marble floor, no longer speaking at all. Around them, whispers continued spreading quietly through the lobby. "That's the CEO. They tried to remove him in front of everyone." One receptionist slowly shook her head in disbelief, while another looked genuinely uncomfortable, remembering how nobody stepped in while the humiliation was happening. The executive beside Mr. Carter tried to regain control of the situation. "Please clear the lobby," he told nearby employees sharply. But nobody moved immediately. The shock still held the room in place. Mr. Carter remained calm through all of it, his posture relaxed, his expression controlled. That calmness somehow made the silence worse, because he didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten anyone. The truth of what happened was already enough. The first guard finally forced himself to speak again. "Sir, I sincerely apologize." Mr. Carter looked at him quietly for a moment. "You apologized after learning my title," he said calmly. "That's the part you should think about." The guard's face tightened immediately because he understood exactly what Mr. Carter meant. This wasn't just about one mistake anymore. It was about how quickly people decided someone's worth based on appearance alone. And now the entire company had witnessed it happen in real time. The lobby remained heavy with silence as Mr. Carter slowly looked around the room again. Employees stood completely still near the elevators, avoiding eye contact, pretending to focus on phones or papers that nobody was actually reading. The tension had spread through the entire building now. Everyone understood this moment would be remembered long after the morning ended. Mr. Carter calmly adjusted his jacket and looked toward the executive beside him. "Interesting first day," he said quietly. The executive forced a nervous smile that disappeared almost immediately. "Sir, we deeply regret what happened." Mr. Carter nodded slightly, but his expression didn't change. "Do you?" he asked. The question immediately made the executive uncomfortable. Because apologies were easy now. Easy after the truth came out. Easy after everyone realized who he was. Mr. Carter slowly turned his attention back toward the guards. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "If I walked in wearing a $5,000 suit, would this conversation even exist?" Neither guard answered. They couldn't, because everyone in the lobby already knew the answer. The first guard lowered his eyes again, while the second guard stood frozen beside the turnstiles, his embarrassment visible on his face. Mr. Carter looked around at the employees watching silently. "That's the problem," he continued. "Too many people here confuse appearance with value." The sentence spread across the lobby like a direct accusation toward the entire company, not just security. Several employees shifted uncomfortably. One young intern near the reception desk looked genuinely ashamed now. Mr. Carter picked up his leather bag fully onto his shoulder again and glanced once more at the giant company logo hanging above the lobby. "A company's culture," he said quietly, "is revealed by how it treats people with no visible power." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because deep down, everyone knew he was right. The lobby remained completely silent as Mr. Carter finally turned toward the elevators. No one tried to stop him now. No one questioned him. The same employees who ignored him earlier instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path through the marble floor lobby as he walked forward calmly with his leather bag over his shoulder. The executives followed behind him nervously, their earlier confidence replaced with visible tension. The security guards stayed near the entrance, frozen in place, watching the man they had tried to throw out moments earlier become the most powerful person in the building. Mr. Carter stopped briefly before the elevator doors opened and looked back across the lobby one final time. His eyes moved slowly over the employees, the reception desk, the guards, the giant company logo hanging above them all. "Never decide someone's value," he said calmly, "before you learn who they are." The words landed heavily across the room. Then the elevator doors opened. Mr. Carter stepped inside without another word. The executives followed quickly behind him, and seconds later the doors closed. The lobby stayed silent even after the elevator disappeared upward, because everyone standing there understood the same thing now. The most powerful man in the company had entered the building with no title visible, no expensive image, no obvious status, and almost nobody treated him with respect until they discovered his power. And that truth was far more uncomfortable than the mistake itself.